It's March 1st. Everything's greening up. And if you have livestock or are thinking about having livestock, when things start greening up, you start thinking about grazing. Today, that's what we're going to talk about. Have you ever thought about how you were going to graze or looked at the different methods of grazing and just became confused? So many different types or terminologies or methods. Today, I want to break those down for you, share the different kinds of grazing, the benefits, the pros and cons. I'm even going to talk about some of the people who are proponents of certain types of grazing, so you can go check their stuff out. Before we're done today, I'm going to tell you the kind of grazing that you need to be doing. What kind of grazing do you need to be doing? I'm going to tell you as we get to the end today. So let's jump into it. So the first type of grazing we want to talk about today is continuous grazing. And continuous grazing is probably what most people are familiar with, and probably I would say is how the most livestock are grazed across the nation. Continuous grazing is basically all gates are open, all land is fair game, and as soon as something green comes up, the animals are taking it. They're eating what they want. They're going where they want, as long as they have access to water and grass. The person who's continuously grazing just lets the animals go and do their thing. For some people, that's the best way. That fits their lifestyle. It's the way that they want to do it. I would say that there are some negatives to continuous grazing. Unless they're understocked for the acreage, there wouldn't be rest time for plants to get a good growth on before the animals take them again. So basically, when stuff comes up, animals are taking it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's that way in every case. That's the negative as it pertains to continuous grazing. But a lot of people are doing that. Lots of people around the nation have cattle, they put them on their pastures, and the cows go wherever they need to go, or maybe every now and then just opening a gate. That's continuous, or the grazing when cattle are always on it. The next type of grazing that I want to talk about is rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is different from continuous grazing because there are paddocks that are set up and the cows are rotated from one place to the next. In a lot of rotational systems, there might be four pastures or paddocks, and the cows stay on one for a certain period of time, go to the second one, go to the third one, and that gives rest and breaks for each paddock or pasture. Also understand that the terminology rotational grazing is a general term because the other methods of grazing that we're going to talk about today are forms of rotational grazing, but they're a lot more detailed, and there are a lot of different thoughts along those. So rotational grazing is a form of grazing, and at its simplest form, it's just moving from one paddock to another, allowing some rest time, but also understand that as we go through these other methods of grazing, we are talking about different forms of rotational grazing. Each one of them will be different forms of rotational grazing. And so some people just have set paddocks. They just rotate their cows every now and then, and that's what works for their lifestyle. It's what works for their cattle, and that's the way they choose to do it. And rotational grazing is great because where continuous grazing allows the animals to have access to whatever, whenever, rotational grazing does give the land some rest and the ability for the soil to rejuvenate and for the plants to get a jump and growth before the animals come and nip them off again. So rotational grazing is very helpful and something that you may want to consider. The next form of grazing that I want to talk to you about today is mob grazing. Mob grazing is rotational grazing with large numbers of animals or condensed animals. So mob grazing would be taking a whole bunch of animals and putting them in a small space and rotating them probably multiple times a day. One time, probably two times, maybe even three, up to four times. Mob grazing is using the impact of many animals to transition the soil or to impact the soil in a way that makes it better. Also, you've got the dung and the urine and the dung impact, the manure impact. And so all of that is going to work together to build soil. And as I said earlier, it is a form of rotational grazing, so they're not going to stay on it very long. They're going to impact it hard, and then they're going to be off of it for quite a while, so giving it lots of rest. So if you're interested in mob grazing, Greg Judy is one of those guys on YouTube. You can look up his channel, Greg Judy Regenerative Rancher. He practices mob grazing, I believe. He's kind of been back and forth and talked about it different kinds, but he often talks about using the mob to impact the soil. And so Greg Judy's impacted my thoughts on grazing in a lot of ways. I don't adhere to everything he says. His stuff doesn't always fit in my context, and I'll tell you about that before we're done today. But I do look up to him as someone who is very knowledgeable in the regenerative world and understands soil and how animals impact soil. And so I would encourage you to go check out his channel. Most people, if you're watching this channel, I'm sure you've seen Greg Judy. But if you're interested in that form of grazing, you can go check it out and learn even more from him. The next method of grazing I want to talk to you about is adaptive grazing. Adaptive grazing is a form of rotational grazing. In many ways, it's similar to mob grazing, and maybe you could classify them together, but I think there are some distinctions. Adaptive grazing is the thing that sets it apart is that it's non-prescriptive. In other words, you're not going to do the same thing every day. You're not going to do the same thing every year. As a matter of fact, the rules that surround adaptive grazing really, really the high point of that is that you're continually trying to change things up. It's kind of like when you go to the gym. The thought process, the science in it is that when you go to the gym and you do the same workout every day, you don't get the same impact because there's muscle memory. Well, the soil and the land can do the same thing. If you rotate the same rotation every year, if you put the same amount of animals on, as far as like how much poundage per acre of animal that you're putting on there, how many animals per acre that you're putting on, or if they're on the same place at the same time of year, whatever. If you're rotating or if you're using polywire and the paddocks are the same size or the same shape, all of those things affect how the animals impact the soil. And so adaptive grazing says we're not going to do it the same way. We're going to intentionally change things up. We're going to intentionally make sure that we're not going to just move the animals at the same time in the same way, in the same rotation that we've always done it, but we're going to change it from year to year to year intentionally, understanding that mixing it up, being non-prescriptive and adaptive, and adapting to the surroundings and the things that are going on, because from year to year things change. The weather conditions might have you may have a drought or more rain or whatever, and so you have to change as you go. And I love a lot of the principles of adaptive grazing. There's so much there that I think really anybody can learn from and use in whatever form or method that they're using to graze. So I want to encourage you to check that out. The main proponent that I know of adaptive grazing is Dr. Alan Williams. He Understanding Ag, I believe, is his YouTube channel, and I would encourage you to go check everything he does out. I don't utilize every method or everything that he talks about, but there's so much science, so much sound advice that he gives. Go check out Dr. Alan Williams. A whole lot of his stuff is lecture style, but if you can hang in, he'll give you something to use and work with. And so I encourage you to check out Understanding Ag. Dr. Alan Williams, he works with Gabe Brown as well. I'm sure you've heard of him. So check them out. They'll help you in this area of grazing. The last method of grazing that I want to talk to you about today is total grazing. Total grazing is ultra high stock density grazing, which mob grazing could be considered that too, using lots of poundage or lots of animals in a small amount of on a small piece of land or a small paddock in order to impact the forage. Now, the difference in total grazing and any other grazing that I've talked to you about today, many of those others, the advice would be to take half, leave half, or take 2/3, or take 1/3, leave 2/3. I'm talking about on the grass. So you only take so much of it and you leave the rest so that there's a blade there to receive sunlight and to grow more. Total grazing actually is the attempt to get the most utilization out of the forage that's there. So total grazing is wanting to take as much of the forage in a short amount of time that you can. Many total grazers are doing 4 up to 6, even more rotations a day. So they're putting them in small areas so that there's a lot of competition between the animals. So the animals eat things that they probably wouldn't normally eat because, like a broadleaf or something that if they were just given a choice, they wouldn't. But they're in small areas. There's a lot of competition with other animals, and they're going to utilize every bit of that forage that they can. And so they're getting 80 to 90% utilization of the forage instead of leaving half or leaving 2/3. And the idea behind this is that it's by doing so you're growing a stronger root system. Fat roots is what they say. And it does take longer time for regrowth, but you're using smaller paddocks because you're utilizing more forage, And so the rotations are, it gives you longer to come back around because your paddocks are smaller as you go. All of these methods of grazing are the utilization of time, giving rest, and it's just different ideas or mindsets. And this is what I fully believe. I don't believe any of them are wrong. I think it has to do with context. So if you're looking into total grazing, the person you want to look to, the main proponent that I know of in that area is Jim or Jaime Elizondo. You can just search Jaime Elizondo or Jim Elizondo, and you can find his YouTube channel and learn about total grazing. I'm going to tell you what kind of grazing you need to do. I think I can tell everybody here, everybody who's watching, what kind of grazing you need to do with one idea. And you need to do the kind of grazing that works in your context. I've listened to all of these people and I've studied their types of grazing. I've tried to do it like Greg Judy. I tried to do like Alan Williams. And in my context, I have almost all warm season grass. I'm just getting into having more cool season grass. And so for the majority of the summer, I've got Bermuda and Bahia, and their type of grazing in this southern climate in Arkansas, in my context. I'm not saying it doesn't work in Dr. Alan Williams' context, but in my context, it just doesn't work to take half, leave half, because what happens is our animals are going to take it to the ground in certain areas because that's like ice cream. And in other areas, they're going to leave it standing. And the next time we come around, the ones that were non-desirable the first time are not going to be desirable the second time. And that just becomes woody and lignified. And so the thing that is undesirable is allowed to grow, and the thing that is desirable gets decimated. And so in our context, we're practicing and pushing toward more of a total grazing concept. Now, it's all preliminary. We started it last year. It seemed to work really well. I don't know, the whole deal with drought is tough. The whole concept in total grazing is that you leave half your farm to stockpile. So that was why we're grazing stockpile forage even now, because we let half of it rest for the whole summer, or the end of the summer. And so then the next year you let the other half of your farm rest while you graze the part that rested the year before. And so it's a flip-flop effect, which again is a lot of change, like Dr. Alan Williams talks about. And so anyway, I feel like I'm rambling about these different methods, but it's important to understand that you just do whatever works in your context. If all you can do because of time constraints or whatever, or if it's just the way you want to do it is continuous graze and let them go out there, just enjoy having cattle and a piece of property. If you have the wherewithal and the desire to really build soil faster, you can get more aggressive and look into these other methods. But I'm telling you, the method you need to use is the method that works for you. Not my method, not their method, your method. What method works for you? Learn from people, take it in, figure it out what they're doing, and then say, okay, I'm going to adapt this to work, to fit in my context on my farm and my lifestyle. And I feel like I'm talking about this all the time because I just really get tired of hearing people say, well, you got to do it this way and you got to do it that way, and this is the right way. The right way is what works, right? And so I encourage you to do that. So those are different methods of grazing, and hopefully there's just a little bit of a nugget today that helps you out a little bit as you're learning to graze or figuring out getting livestock, or maybe you're just getting started, or maybe you're like me, you're a few years in and you're just trying to figure out what method works best in your context. Let's all grow together. Let's all try things and see what's going to work. And as we do that, we're all going to be better for it. So if you have any thoughts or any other ideas, drop them down in the comments below. If you have questions or whatever, we'd love to interact in any way we can. So feel free to drop those in the comments. And as always, it sure helps me out if you'll give us a thumbs up, if you'll subscribe to our channel, even if you'll hit the bell for notifications. That keeps us in the algorithm. And we're just trying to build a channel and share information and really build a community. We just love this opportunity to build community. So, hey, I'm thankful that you joined me today. God bless you. We'll see you on the next one.